there was certainly an element of making my grandfather proud and honoring him by taking part in the award.
The palace did not tremble because of a crown, a throne, or a speech. It trembled because of a voice. A voice on leaked audio. A voice that allegedly captured Queen Camilla being confronted behind closed doors over jewels no one was supposed to be asking about, pieces no one was supposed to be tracing, and a name that should never have been drifting through that corridor in the first place. Lady Louise Windsor. Suddenly the whispers were no longer floating like harmless smoke through drawing rooms and private dining halls. Suddenly they had shape. Suddenly they had accusation. And suddenly one question began racing through royal circles like a match thrown into dry velvet. Why were missing jewels being linked to the quietest girl in the family? That is what makes this story feel so explosive, so dangerous, so unbelievably irresistible. Because Lady Louise was never supposed to be the loud one, never supposed to be the dramatic one, never supposed to be the center of a palace storm involving jewels, inheritance, loyalty, and private fury. She was supposed to remain what she has always looked like from the outside: calm, dutiful, modest, almost invisible compared to the headline magnets around her. And maybe that is exactly why this rumor has landed like a detonation. The woman nobody was watching is suddenly the woman at the center of a royal mystery. And the more people try to dismiss it, the more the details begin to feel strange, connected, and far too specific to ignore. Because the story was never only about jewels. It was about access. It was about memory. It was about who Queen Elizabeth trusted when the cameras were gone, the dinners were over, and the institution fell silent enough for truth to breathe. People love to talk about the monarchy as if everything is governed by line of succession and public rank, but that is not how private affection works, and that is not how sentiment is passed down. Behind the rigid structure of titles and roles, there has always been another royal map, one drawn not by protocol but by emotion, and on that map, Lady Louise occupied a place far warmer, far more intimate, and far more meaningful than most people ever realized. That was the first problem. The second problem was that some people inside royal orbit knew it. For years, the image of Louise was almost disarming in its simplicity. The granddaughter who did not chase glamour. The young royal who stepped away from the freak styling she could have used. The girl who worked an ordinary garden center job instead of floating through life like a tiara-born ornament. That image made her seem harmless, almost too grounded to ever be involved in palace intrigue. But quiet does not mean unimportant. Humble does not mean excluded. And ordinary-looking people in extraordinary families often hear more, see more, and inherit more trust than anyone notices until it is much too late. That is where this story begins to darken. Because once people started asking who really had the late Queen's private confidence, Lady Louise's name kept coming back like a secret that refused to stay buried. And then came the whispers about the jewels. Not the crown jewels displayed for history books and state ritual, but the private collection, the deeply personal pieces, the gifts, the heirlooms, the things that did not simply sparkle but carried emotional fingerprints. Those were the pieces that mattered. Those were the pieces that could wound. Those were the pieces that could ignite resentment not because of their price, but because of what they symbolized. Love, preference, closeness, final choice. In royal life, a brooch is never just a brooch when it once sat against the skin of a queen who understood the power of symbolism better than almost anyone alive. And if even a few of those pieces were set aside, reassigned, promised quietly, or spoken about in ways that did not match the expected order, then what looks like jewelry drama becomes something much uglier, a referendum on who truly mattered. That is why the alleged audio has caused such a frenzy in gossip circles. Not because anyone has publicly authenticated it, not because palace officials have blessed it with comment, but because the emotional architecture of it feels so viciously believable. The claim is that Camilla was confronted, sharply and uncomfortably, over missing pieces and over a trail of assumptions leading toward Lady Louise. Not accused of theft, not declared guilty of anything so simple, but cornered by the implication that the official story around certain jewels did not quite line up with private expectations. That distinction matters, because sometimes in palaces the real scandal is not what was taken. It is what was redirected, what was promised, what was quietly protected, what was never meant to become public language. And imagine the atmosphere if even half of that tension existed. Imagine the frost in the room. Camilla, the woman who fought for years to secure her place, to be seen not as an intruder, but as a settled part of the monarchy's future, suddenly facing a storm tied not to Diana, not to old public wounds, but to the late Queen's private legacy. And not just any rival energy circling that legacy, but the presence of Lady Louise, the granddaughter whose reputation is wrapped in sincerity, duty, and the kind of low-drama dignity that makes confrontation around her look even worse. Because if Louise is linked, even indirectly, then the optics become poisonous. Either she was favored in ways the public never understood, or her name is being used as cover in a palace chess game she never asked to join. Neither version is peaceful. Both versions are combustible. And then there is the emotional sting buried beneath all of it. Queen Elizabeth's quiet preferences may have outlived her in the most inconvenient way possible. People forget that the late queen did not distribute sentiment publicly. She hid it in time, attention, private rituals, and those small acts of trust that outsiders never fully saw. Louise was allowed into spaces and memories that carried unusual weight. She shared rare gentleness with both the late queen and Prince Philip. She inherited not just objects from Philip, but continuity, discipline, and a living connection to his world of carriage driving, a world that was intimate, learned slowly, and never handed out casually. That matters, because when a family knows someone was treasured, every missing item becomes loaded, every silence becomes suspicious, every unexplained decision begins to feel like a message. And look at how the pieces start aligning in a way that feels almost too precise to ignore. Because this isn't just about a single confrontation, it's about the growing tension between what the public believes the royal order should be and what insiders have quietly understood for years, that Queen Elizabeth's personal world did not always follow the same script as her public one. She rewarded loyalty in ways that didn't always match hierarchy, she protected those who asked for nothing, and she valued sincerity over performance, which means the idea that Lady Louise could have been quietly favored in ways that ripple into the present isn't just gossip fuel, it's a narrative that fits too comfortably into everything we already know about how she lived and chose. And if that is even partially true, then the real shock isn't that jewels are missing or reassigned. The real shock is that those choices might now be colliding with a different era of the monarchy, one led by King Charles III, and defined by a different set of expectations, alliances, and sensitivities, where every inherited decision carries political weight, where every personal preference left behind by the late queen becomes a potential fault line, and where Camilla finds herself in a position that is both powerful and incredibly exposed at the same time. Because let's be honest, Camilla's journey into the heart of the monarchy has never been simple, never been universally embraced, and never been free from the shadow of perception. And now imagine adding this kind of narrative on top of that. A narrative where she is not just navigating public expectation, but potentially facing quiet questions about something as symbolically loaded as the late queen's private jewels. A narrative where even a hint of confrontation suggests that not everything is as settled as it appears, and that somewhere behind the polished ceremonies and controlled appearances there may still be unresolved tensions that no official statement can fully erase. And then there is Lady Louise, standing in the center of it all without ever stepping forward, without ever making a claim, without ever asking to be part of this storm, which somehow makes the situation even more volatile, because the less she says, the more space there is for interpretation. Now, the more room there is for speculation, and the more her silence starts to feel like something people want to decode, as if the answers are hidden not in what she does, but in what she doesn't do, not in what she claims, but in what others claim around her. That's the paradox that's making this story spread so aggressively, because it isn't driven by loud declarations or official confirmations, it's driven by the tension between two completely different images of the same person. The quiet, grounded young woman who worked for 7 an hour and chose a life of relative normalcy, and the deeply trusted granddaughter who may have been closer to Queen Elizabeth II than anyone publicly understood. And when those two images collide inside a narrative about missing jewels and alleged confrontations, the result is something that feels too layered, too symbolic, too emotionally charged to dismiss easily. And the palace knows this, whether they address it or not, because they have always understood that the most dangerous stories are not the ones that can be clearly proven or disproven, but the ones that sit in that uncomfortable space in between, where enough details feel real, enough history supports the possibility, and enough silence surrounds it to let people imagine the rest. And this story has all of that. It has the emotional logic, it has the historical context, it has the unresolved dynamics, and now it has the added spark of a leaked audio claim that refuses to go away no matter how quietly it is ignored. And that is why this isn't fading, it's evolving. Because every new appearance, every new jewel worn, every absence, every shift in public positioning becomes another piece of the puzzle, another moment for people to analyze, another chance for the narrative to grow stronger or stranger depending on how the palace moves. And right now there is no clear closure, no definitive explanation, just a growing sense that something beneath the surface is still unsettled, still shifting, still waiting for either confirmation or collapse. Because in the end, this was never just about jewels. It was about legacy, about who carries the invisible weight of Queen Elizabeth's private world into the future, about who she trusted when no one was watching, and about whether those choices, made quietly and personally, are now clashing with a new royal reality that cannot fully contain them. And if even a fraction of that tension is real, then what we are witnessing is not just a rumor cycle, it is the beginning of a deeper story, one that the palace may never openly tell, but one that that keeps revealing itself in fragments, in whispers, in reactions, and in the uncomfortable feeling that behind the calm exterior